General Mark Milley, Governor Gavin Newsom, and the Australia-UK-US defence deal. I'm Adam Byrne, and this is the Square Circle. Hello and welcome to the Square Circle. I'm your host, Adam Byrne. Joining us today are Libertarian and Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute, Doug Bandow. Hello, Doug.
Hey, Adam. Nice to be on again.
Welcome back. Progressive activist and ReproAction co-founder, Erin Matson. Hi, Erin.
Good evening.
And we also have Conservative Newsweek contributing editor, Peter Roff. Hi, Peter.
Present.
Well, welcome, everyone. Veteran panel today, so let's crack straight on, because this week the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, is being called a traitor for his reported actions in a new Bob Woodward book. Here's CBS News with the story.
General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is facing calls from some Republicans to resign after two veteran reporters wrote that in the tumultuous closing days of the Trump presidency, Milley secretly reassured the Chinese, "We are not going to attack." In their new book, Bob Woodward and Robert Costa say Milley feared that former President Trump had gone into a serious mental decline in the aftermath of the election and might go rogue, launching a strike against China.
So, Erin Matson, was General Milley looking out for the best interests of the country, or did he betray his oath to the Constitution?
Well, Adam, I think the most important part of this story is the dangerous position that the United States was in at the conclusion of last year and at the beginning of this year. We had a president who had gone completely rogue. Our systems had failed to rein him in. There was an attempt to overthrow the US government that he cheerled and incited. And so I think it's no surprise that the generals were concerned about his mental health. I think the real story is the sadness that our institutions failed us and they did not appropriately rein him in.
Peter Roff, he was a danger to the nation, says Erin. President Trump, that is.
President Trump, I see. General Milley, possibly. My problem here is it's a Bob Woodward book, so I don't know if I can actually believe what's alleged. But if he, in fact, did what Woodward alleges he did, yes, it's treasonous. It's a violation of the military chain of command. You know, one of those things that flows out of the rule of law and the Constitution that Trump apparently danced all over. You know, there's another allegation from January 6th that Speaker Pelosi called the general to have a conversation about the nuclear codes and the commands to launch weapons. She's not part of that chain of authority. She exceeded her authority by inserting herself into that conversation. Not something that her special committee is going to look into. But, you know, if you want to talk about people throwing out the Constitution, you have to talk about all of it. And that's one of the things that's been lost in frankly, what I think is an extreme exaggeration of the threat, the riots on January 6th. And I was on site overlooking, doing commentary for a network while they were going on. That this constituted any kind of threat to the permanent government of the United States or to the transition of power from one president to another. I think that's nonsensical. But this idea that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs or the Speaker of the House can just take it upon themselves to do things that are outside their lane of authority and responsibility within the chain of command, that's dangerous too.
So Doug, it sounds like from these reports, General Milley was ready to try and subvert any orders by President Trump. Is that treason, as Peter Roff suggests?
I wouldn't call it treason. I don't think he was trying to betray the United States. I think what the allegations are problematic, that to have a general, especially making contact with the foreign military under these circumstances, I think it's appropriate to have conversations with civilian higher ups, that is the Secretary of Defense and others, if there's a serious concern. about the temperament of the president. This isn't the first time we've had these kind of issues. In Richard Nixon's closing days, Al Haig, as chief of staff, and others had some similar concerns. But this should be very, very carefully done. I mean, this is not something you want your generals getting into. We have civilian control for a reason. And I think that's why any discussions like this should involve the civilian leadership of the Pentagon and other national security agencies. And it should be an absolute last resort where you actually think there's a serious chance of the president going rogue with the use of the military or nuclear weapons. I haven't seen evidence to suggest that, but that would require the involvement of civilians.
And Erin, in your initial answer, you focus more on the broader context of the time. But if I can bring you back to General Milley himself, isn't that subverting the chain of command? Did he break his oath?
Well, I don't know if I would go so far as to say I agree with Doug, but I'd like to pick up on a thread that he's talking on that I do see as closely related. I think that this issue should be carefully and closely studied. What did happen? And I'd like to go with General Milley, but I'd like to go to the broader context. What we have is we had an attempted authoritarian takeover of our US government, and we need to have a serious look at it. And the fact is we can't even get a commission going with the consent of both parties on January 6th. And what happened? We need to think much broader. What happens the next time we have a president who is similarly rogue, incapacitated, and calling for the overthrow of our basic institutions? I also just would like to vehemently disagree with Peter on the minimization of what happened on January 6th. They were calling for hanging Mike Pence. There were threats to numerous members of Congress and their lives. And in fact, what we're seeing from the Woodward book allegations is that Dan Quayle had to step in and tell Mike Pence that indeed he had to stand up for the election results. So there are very serious things that need to be considered. And I agree that with regards to General Milley, that should be looked at more deeply.
Peter, you've had the chance to hear the other two. Disagreeing with you there.
I think Erin is for political benefit hyping what happened. I was there. I saw it, albeit from a distance, but I saw it. It was a demonstration that got out of hand. It was a demonstration that was designed to be problematic. Mayor Bowser of DC knew it would be problematic. Nancy Pelosi knew it would be problematic. They refused the offer to have the National Guard present. Lots of questions were raised about the legitimacy of the second President Bush by Democrats. Nobody called that an effort to overthrow the government. This wasn't an effort to overthrow the government.
I do want to comment that I think Erin is mixing two things, which is I'm not aware of anyone talking about Trump actually using the military in this context for a coup. I think that the on the Capitol was very serious. They wanted to block, the peaceful transfer of power. And I suspect if that mob had run across Mike Pence, I doubt he would have escaped unharmed. Maybe he would not have been hung, but I hate to think what that mob would have done if they came across him or Nancy Pelosi or some of the others. So I think it was quite serious. But I think that Trump's inflaming that mob was very different from, appearing to be ready to call forth the U.S. Army or National Guard to try to seize power. So that's why I think that what Milley did is rather kind of separate from the question of what happened on January 6th.
But perhaps we'll move on there, because also this week, California Governor Gavin Newsom weathered an effort to remove him from office. Here's coverage from NBC News.
And thank you for rejecting this recall.
Overnight, Governor Gavin Newsom declaring victory, with California voters rejecting a months-long effort to remove him from office. Newsom calling the no vote a validation of his policy priorities.
We said yes to science. We said yes to vaccines. We said yes to ending this pandemic.
Following early tight polls, Newsom received support from big-name Democrats, including President Biden, who campaigned alongside him. Larry Elder, the conservative talk radio host and replacement candidate, who received the most votes of the 46 running, had indicated he wouldn't accept the results.
Whether or not you win or lose, will you accept the results of the election tomorrow?
I think we all ought to be looking at election integrity, no matter whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican.
Late Tuesday, he addressed voters.
We may have lost
the battle, but we are going to win the war.
So, Peter Roff, the California recall, was it a shining example of freedom and democracy, or a colossal waste of money?
I think it may have been both. I am not at all surprised by the outcome. I am not at all surprised that Governor Newsom was sustained in office by the margin that he was. The California Labor Federation said they put 20,000 people, union members, out into the streets to go harvest ballots, and there were $100 million spent on keeping him in office. So I'm not surprised that it ended the way it did. If it had merely been a referendum on Newsom's confidence as governor, I think he would have been recalled. But the Newsom people, with the help of the national and the Los Angeles and San Francisco media in particular, were able to turn it into a Newsom versus Larry Elder contest. Larry Elder being the black radio commentator who somebody called the black face of white supremacy. He's a mercurial type. I'm not sure he's particularly suited to the office, to political office, period. But among the candidates running to replace Newsom, he got more votes than anybody else, which shows that Newsom's strategists were right. By making this a Newsom versus Elder contest, they were able to take the onus off the way Newsom mismanaged the COVID pandemic, the maskless dinner at French Laundry, and the other boo-boos that he has committed. I don't think that Newsom gets recalled. I think he probably gets reelected as governor. But what I do think that this does is removes him as a national political figure. He had a bright future. He was a future presidential or vice presidential nominee. I think the recall takes him out of that equation, even though he won it so significantly, because of the amount of time and effort and money that had to be expended on his part to keep him in office.
So, Erin, what's your view of how this recall came about and how it ended?
Yeah, I have very different takeaways from this. I think, in fact, the outcome of the recall and the victory for Gavin Newsom in staying office resuscitated what had been a flailing future trajectory in the national party and seeking a potential presidential run. I think that the outcomes that we should look at are multifold. One, Newsom is back on the scene nationally. Two, COVID is a winner on the ballot for those who are seeking to put in place safeguards to protect people. This was very much supposed to be a referendum on COVID restrictions and restrictions that are meant to protect people. And he won, and he won big. So I think those are primary takeaways to come from this. Another piece is that Trump is an albatross for conservatives seeking to run for public office. The fact of the matter is Biden made this about, he went and he traveled to California and he stood side by side supporting Governor Newsom and made very clear that a vote against Newsom was a vote for Trump. And that is still a winning message. It is California. We know how California voters go. So I think if people really want to think about national implications, the race to be looking at is the upcoming Virginia governor's race.
Doug, before we go to those broader points that Erin and Peter raised, what did you feel about how the recall was handled?
Well, the problem is the recall process. The outcome is not at all surprising. In California today, the Republican Party barely exists. It's a wreck. Ronald Reagan won 4 statewide general elections there. One can't imagine him or anyone like him winning, again. And the critical thing is, I don't think people essentially voted on, the level of protection and whether they should wear masks. The point is the recall process is quite screwy. What it says is on the single ballot, you remove the governor, and then all these other people, whoever got the most votes ends up as governor, which means for any Democrat in the state, it doesn't matter what you thought of Gavin Newsom as governor. Did you want, in this case, Larry Elder or one of the other 4? There are more than 40 candidates. This is an utterly lunatic process. So people focused on the fact that if they voted against Gavin Newsom, who knows who would end up as governor? Well, I mean, that's a good reason for anybody out there to pull his, thing, because you have no idea, what you might be getting. They need a two-step process. I think recall is an important power to have. There should be a recall of the governor, and then you replace him if you want to recall him. You don't have this kind of a weird process. So I think that's really what this is. So I don't think there are a lot of national implications of it. He was in danger because of intensity. That is, Republicans and people who hated some of the measures were much more intense in their feelings than a lot of the Democrats. But that was turned around by the fact that Democrats understood you would end up with this rather, as Peter put it, mercurial, conservative figure as governor. I would have loved as an observer to watch Sacramento with Larry Elder as governor. I'm not sure I would want to be in the state if he was governor. So, and I think a lot of people probably had that same feeling.
Finally, for us on this episode, our final topic, the Biden administration this week announced a major deal with two of America's closest allies. Here's the story from BBC News.
Britain's decision to send its aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth and other warships to the Pacific is proof of the growing strategic importance of the region. The UK, US and Australia are all increasingly concerned about a more assertive China. Hence the decision to step up their military cooperation, and important enough for the leaders of all three countries to announce this new defence partnership, AUKUS for short.
Today we're taking another historic step to deepen and formalize cooperation among all three of our nations, because we all recognize the imperative of ensuring peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific over the long term.
As a start, Britain and America will help Australia build a new fleet of nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed, submarines. Australia had originally asked France to help modernise its submarines, but that deal's now dead.
So, Doug Bandow, does this new defence deal strengthen America's national security, or is it an unnecessary provocation for China?
Well, you could argue that it's both. What the US is doing is drawing Australia more clearly into the anti-China coalition, and it's bringing the United Kingdom, at least to some degree, from Europe to Asia. And now what would actually happen in a war, of course, we still don't know for sure, but the deal basically upgrades the Australian Navy from diesel submarines to nuclear-powered submarines. It's a major improvement in a number of ways. It's going to take quite a while to come to fruition. The Chinese are already upset about it, and the French are very mad because the French had a deal to upgrade the diesel submarines, and that has been tossed out. Indeed, the French embassy canceled the reception that it was going to hold in celebration of the American-French alliance. And they were quite outspoken in their opinion of this. It makes sense to try to get the Asian countries to do more to counteract China, especially in the Navy. The ultimate question is Australia in danger of getting drawn into a conflict that it might not want? The Asians are very divided. None of them want to go to war with China. Some of them are willing to criticize China. Some of them are willing to do a little bit more. Some of them won't even criticize China, including countries like South Korea. So this is going to be very interesting to watch. It's a long-term effort for the United States not to be the only country viewed as to counteract China. It wants to have American allies do so as well. It's their waters. They should actually take the lead, not America. I think this is probably helpful in that direction, but we have to realize relations with China are quite tense at the moment. So we want to be very careful where some of these things go.
And Erin, I do want to come back to the issue of the relationship with the French, and not just because cancelling a Washington gala is maybe the most inside DC protest I have ever heard of. But what is your general reaction, first of all, to this deal?
Yeah, so middle school diplomacy, no doubt. No, my reaction to this deal is, look, China is an extreme threat to the United States and the world. This is a rising authoritarian, anti-democratic power, and it's something that we need to keep our eyes on the prize on. So I think for me, what is most fascinating is why Australia chose to back away from France and the deal that it had pursued there and to saddle up with the United States.
Peter, what's your view of this deal? I think our initial question was considering whether or not it's about strengthening national security for America or perhaps unnecessarily provoking China.
I think the Anglosphere represents the best hope of mankind for defeating totalitarianism wherever it appears. And in this case, you've got an Anglosphere cooperation that's structured against China. But again, it's just a deal at this point. We don't actually see how it's going to be implemented, how it's going to work out, what the twists and turns are going to be. And I always feel that how it's implemented is going to be far more important than what it actually says. Because people can agree to a lot of things. It's what they do that counts. You can agree to borrow a lot of money. That's only good for your lender is if you actually pay it back rather than just promise to pay it back. So they put this deal together. And if they actually do what they're committed to doing, I think that helps check the China card, the China power expansion in the Pacific. That's a good thing in my mind. But, we have to see if they follow through on the commitments.
Let's move on, folks. I know we always normally do 3 topics, but by popular demand, maybe not popular demand, but some of you have asked that we talk about this week because Friday we'll see the US marking Constitution Day. And I guess we wanted to ask yourselves, what is the state of constitutional government in America today? Doug, can we go to you first?
Well, there once was a time when the Constitution was relevant to American governance. I think these days that's rather attenuated. I mean, judges kind of make up laws, they go along. Bureaucrats in Congress do what they want. The president does what he wants, and Congress won't stop him. They won't use the powers that they've been granted. So I think it's kind of a sad state. We're going to celebrate the history, and it's a venerable history. It's one that the miracle in Philadelphia, and we have a lot of other wonderful historical memories with it. But I think the state of the Constitution and constitutional jurisprudence is rather tattered these days.
Peter?
I do think it's a little bit tenuous for some of the reasons that Doug mentioned. It's important that we look at the Constitution historically. We assess its place now. It is, in fact, not a political football. It says what it means. It means what it says. And so we have judges trying to change it. We have legislators trying to change it. There's a bill before Congress now that Nancy Pelosi is pushing that would, in my view, unconstitutionally give the federal government authority over state conduct of elections. That concerns me. The 10th Amendment, which says that all the powers that aren't specifically given to the federal government are reserved for the states. That's been out the window for at least since the New Deal, if not since the trust-busting era of Teddy Roosevelt. I think we have to keep checking back and thinking seriously about why we have a division of powers, why power is divided not just between the judicial, legislative, and executive branches, but between the federal, state, and local government. Because I think in their wisdom, the founders understood that governments would be run by men and women, and they were fallible. It was Madison who said, if men were angels, then no government would be necessary. We're not angels, and anybody who has power has the potential to abuse it. The Constitution is supposed to be the safeguard against that.
So, Erin,
the Bill of Rights is.
Erin, your fellow panelists have some concerns. Are you going to give us a defense of constitutional democracy in America today?
Oh, I believe very deeply that the Constitution is worth fighting for. And I am also troubled by the status of the Constitution in the United States government today. In reproductive rights, in which I work, I'm deeply concerned that the Supreme Court has let a blatantly unconstitutional law to go into effect merely because of the enforcement mechanism, which is bounty hunters, versus having a state on the hook. And so, as I've said throughout this show, I think we need to really deeply reflect on our constitutional ideals and ensure that we are living up to them here in the United States.
Okay, well, sounds like we need a constitutional convention of our own here on the Square Circle in the future. Stay tuned for that one. But let's move on now to some questions from our viewers. The first one comes from Rosie Medina, who asks, could you make a case that what General Milley did was smart because Trump presented a unique kind of threat to national stability? Erin, you were hinting at this.
I think people could certainly make that case, and I'm certain there are people who believe that. As somebody who does direct action is something when people take power into their own hands because the structures are failing them. And I think there are people who would argue very vociferously that that's what the general did.
Peter, I assume you wouldn't agree.
You can make a case for anything. You can make a case for why apple pie is healthier for you than carrots, but that doesn't mean you're right. And in this case, I think, again, if the Woodward book is accurate, and I don't know that it is, that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff went outside the chain of command and needs to be disciplined, needs to resign.
And Doug, Rosie's question suggests that former President Trump was a unique kind of threat.
Well, as I indicated, people had these concerns about Richard Nixon. So, I mean, this is not the first time people have worried about the view and the temperament of the president at the moment. I don't see anything to suggest that President Trump was thinking about going to war with China. So I don't see why Milley would be talking, for example, to a Chinese general. I could certainly see again the president Milley talking to the Secretary of Defense, these kinds of conversations, indication of a concern. If there's specifics, that would be the abuse of the military in a way that would undermine the Constitution. But I just haven't seen, I mean, I am no fan of Donald Trump, I can assure you, but I don't see anything to suggest that he was posing that kind of a threat. Watchful wariness strikes me as being, the word at the time, as opposed to these conversations that General Milley is alleged to have had.
Okay, and we'll move on to a second question now, which comes from Byron Mann, who asks, should more states have recall mechanisms like California's? And Doug, you were suggesting that you support the recall mechanism.
Well, I think it's useful to have a recall. I mean, there were people recalled who liberals would be very happy of. The former Governor Evan Meacham of Arizona, for example. I mean, there are people over the years, they've had people who were forced to resign, who you would want to have removed if they wouldn't have resigned. I would not choose the procedure that California uses. I do think it's useful to have an ultimate mechanism that you can remove an abusive governor if there's no other way, but it should be a more practical mechanism than the one California has.
So, Erin, is it just about tweaking how a recall would work, or should we just wait till the next election? Voters made their choice, and they should stick with it.
I think it's important to have these checks, and so I don't object to California having it. And if other states wants to institute that as a possibility, I don't object.
Peter, would you like to see more recall mechanisms in other states?
I would like to see more recalls. I believe strongly in the idea of popular sovereignty. I can think of a couple of elections. The 2016 presidential election is one. The gubernatorial election in Louisiana, where your choices were Edwin Edwards and David Duke, where recall would have been very nice because it wouldn't have mattered who won. We could start the process over again because the democratic system is imperfect, and usually we can live with the imperfections. Every once in a while, though, we have a problem that it might be nice if we had other ways to check. I'm not for national recall, but certainly on the state basis, yes, I think that state officials should be subject to recall.
Okay, so we have some agreement there among our panelists. And with that, let's move on to our final and regular segment, the most underreported story of the week. Who would like to go first? Nobody's biting.
I'll go first.
Okay, go on, Peter.
And it's a story that's breaking right now, so I'm taking a chance here and making a prediction.
It's dangerous.
It's going to be underreported, but Mr. Durham, who was appointed by Attorney General Barr to investigate the allegations of political chicanery, producing the Steele document, which sent the Trump administration swirling even deeper down into the hole, announced today an indictment of an attorney at the law firm that represented Mrs. Clinton for lying to the FBI. And I suspect that this story will come and go quickly without any further explanation, because in the environment we're in even now, No one wants to admit that the Steele dossier and the Russia collusion story were political gamesmanship that got seriously out of control.
Erin Matson, what's your most underreported story this week?
The Wall Street Journal has been running a fantastic series of reporting on Facebook, and in particular on how Facebook executives have acted poorly in a number of areas, including something that I'm very concerned about as a feminist activist, that on Instagram in particular, they are very aware of how deleterious this app is for teens' mental health, and they refuse to do anything about it.
Okay, and I think 1/6 of the world's population on Facebook, so certainly plenty of impact there. Doug, bring us home, your most underreported story this week.
The German election is a week and a half away. The German electoral system is wonderful. You don't even have a set number of seats for the Bundestag. They mix constituencies plus proportional representation. There are 7 parties that are likely to be represented. Very likely the Christian Democrats, the long dominant party, Angela Merkel's party was the lead in the last 4 governments, is probably going to end up out of government. The Greens are very likely to be in, and the question of who their partners will be, it could be a left-wing government with the Social Democrats and Die Linke, which is the former Communist Party of East Germany. It could be more right-leaning, bringing in the Free Democrats, who are kind of a bit more libertarianish. And there's even an outside possibility the Christian Democrats could sneak in with the Free Democrats. It's a wonderful free-for-all. Nobody has any idea what's going to happen. It's probably going to be the first 3-party coalition in Germany's history. So if you're a political geek, this is an election to watch.
Well, Doug, if we have a special episode in the German election, I know who should be hosting it. Thank you very much.
That, Adam.
Thank you for that. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you to our guests, and thank you for listening to The Square Circle. I'm Adam Byrne, and we'll see you next week.